The ice broke with a sound like thunder splitting the sky, and Martha felt the world tilt sideways before the freezing water swallowed her whole. One moment she'd been crossing the river, her baby bundled tight against her chest. The next she was plunging into darkness so cold it felt like knives piercing every inch of her skin. Jacob poured on speed, his breath coming in great clouds of steam in the frigid air. His hands were already numb, and he hadn't even touched the water yet. He tried not to think about what it would be like when he did. He'd seen men die from cold water, seen how it could stop a heart in minutes. But he'd also seen what happened to people who drowned, and he'd be damned if he'd stand by and watch it happen. He reached the bend just as the woman came around it, her face barely above the surface now, her arms still locked around what he could now see was a small child. The sight of that hit him like a fist to the gut. He waded in fast, the shock of the cold making his muscles seize, and pushed out toward the channel. The water reached his chest and the current tried to take his feet out from under him, but he braced himself against it and waited. She came to him like driftwood, her eyes closed, her lips blue. Jacob grabbed her with both hands, his fingers so numb he couldn't tell if he had a good grip, and pulled hard toward shore. The current fought him for her, tried to tear her from his grasp, but he was stronger than the river. He'd always been strong. It was the one thing he could count on. Getting back to shore took everything he had. Each step was a battle, each inch forward a small victory. The woman was dead weight in his arms, and the child she held was silent and still. Jacob's legs burned with the effort and the cold, his chest heaved, but he kept moving. When his boots finally found purchase on the gravel bar, he nearly collapsed with relief. He dragged them both up onto the bank and laid them out on the frozen ground. The woman's lips were moving, though no sound came out. She was trying to say something, trying to tell him about the baby. Jacob understood without hearing the words. He pried her frozen arms open, gentle but insistent, and lifted the child free. The boy was blue and cold and completely still, his eyes closed, his small body limp. Jacob laid him on his back and put his ear to the tiny chest. There, faint but present, a heartbeat. The child was alive, but not by much. Jacob turned him on his side and water dribbled from his mouth. He rubbed the small back vigorously, trying to stimulate breathing, and was rewarded with a choking cough. The sound was the most beautiful thing he'd heard in years. The boy coughed again, harder this time, and water came up. Then he drew a shuddering breath and started to cry, that thin wailing sound of a very young baby. Jacob wrapped him in his coat, holding him close to share what body heat he had left, and turned his attention back to the mother. She was conscious but barely, her eyes glazed and unfocused, her whole body shaking with violent shivers. That was actually a good sign. It meant her body still had enough energy to try to warm itself. Jacob knew he needed to get them both somewhere warm and dry immediately. His cabin was a mile upstream, too far to carry them both in their condition. But there was a line shack maybe a quarter-mile back, a shelter he'd built years ago for days when the weather turned while he was working the traps. He made his decision fast. He gathered the woman into his arms, still holding the baby against his chest with one hand, and started walking. His own body was starting to rebel against the cold now, his muscles cramping and his coordination going clumsy. He forced his legs to move, forced his arms to maintain their grip, forced everything to keep working just a little longer. The shack appeared through the trees like salvation. Jacob kicked the door open and carried his burden inside. The space was small and rough, just 4 walls and a roof with a stone fireplace in one corner, but it was shelter, and that was everything. He laid the woman down on the wooden floor and set the baby beside her, then turned to the fireplace. His emergency stores were still there from the last time he'd used the place. Kindling, split logs, matches in a tin. Jacob's hands shook so badly he could barely strike the match, but he managed, and soon he had a small fire growing. He fed it carefully, building it up until flames leaped and crackled and blessed heat began to fill the space. Then came the hard part. He needed to get them out of their wet clothes. The woman first, while she was still conscious enough to understand. He knelt beside her and spoke clearly. Ma'am, I need to remove your wet things. You'll freeze to death otherwise. Do you understand? She nodded weakly, and Jacob worked quickly and efficiently, stripping away the soaked wool dress and undergarments, wrapping her instead in dry blankets from the chest in the corner. He kept his eyes averted as much as possible, offering what dignity he could in the circumstances. The baby was easier, though it broke his heart to see how small and fragile the child looked once the wet clothes were gone. He wrapped the boy in the softest blanket he had and laid him close to the fire. For the next hour, Jacob worked to save their lives. He rubbed their hands and feet to restore circulation. He heated water and made them drink it in small sips. He kept the fire roaring hot until sweat ran down his own back despite his still damp clothes. Slowly, gradually, color returned to their faces. The woman's shivers lessened and finally stopped. The baby's crying grew stronger and more insistent. When the woman's eyes finally focused on him with full awareness, the first word out of her mouth was, "Samuel? He's right here," Jacob said, placing the bundled baby in her arms. "He's all right. You both are." She held her son close and wept, great racking sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her soul. Jacob turned away to give her privacy and busied himself with making something hot for them to eat. He had some dried venison and hardtack in his stores, nothing fancy but it would do. Later, when she'd calmed and eaten and gotten some strength back, she told him her story. Her name was Martha Brennan. Her husband had died of fever 3 weeks past, leaving her alone with baby Samuel on a small homestead 5 miles from the nearest town. The baby had gotten sick with a cough, and she'd been trying to get him to the doctor when the ice gave way. She cried again when she told him this, and again when she thanked him for saving them. Jacob didn't know what to say to that. He'd done what any decent person would do. He told her as much, but she shook her head firmly. "Not anyone," she said. "You risked your life. You didn't have to do that." But he had, and they both knew it. Because that's what people did for each other out here in the wilderness, where nature could kill you in 1,000 different ways, and the only thing standing between you and death was the humanity of your neighbors. When they were strong enough to travel, Jacob carried them both back to his cabin, then hitched up his mule and took them into town. He made sure they got to the doctor, made sure the baby was treated for his cough, made sure Martha had a place to stay until she recovered her strength. She tried to thank him again, standing in the doorway of the boarding house, her baby healthy and sleeping in her arms. Jacob just tipped his hat and turned to go, uncomfortable with gratitude and praise. But her voice stopped him. "Mr. Thorne," she called. "I won't forget this. None of us will." He looked back at her, at this woman who'd held her baby above the freezing water even as she drowned, who'd crossed a dangerous river because her child needed help, who'd somehow survived what should have killed her. "You take care of that boy," he said. "That's all the thanks I need." Then he walked back into the mountains, back to his solitary life, carrying with him the memory of a mother's courage and a baby's cry and the knowledge that sometimes, when it matters most, one person really can make all the difference.